It's Alex and the Workshop Series 101. Most definitely my most controversial video with dozens of comments. A lot of them suggesting I redo this original video I made once long ago with an iPhone 4 propped up on a block of wood with no light and a bad description of how to change the power blades in your power plane here. The remake of the controversial Makita power plane video, how to change the blades. These are the blades in the package here. In the last video I described the magic block, and this seems to be a bit of a controversy as well. Make sure I've got enough light on the subject here. This little block lets you set up your new blades with the holders. That's part of the kit, as well as the original wrench that came with that. So the very first thing I'm going to do is take my magic wrench. You need to undo these 3 bolts. Take these bolts out. Slide out the cover. So this is the cover that holds the bezel. This is part of the original planer that stays right in there. So you have the cover plate. Now, here are the blades tucked in here. And what I've done on this one is upgraded to the modern holder, blade holder. What I have here are pieces of the original blade holder, which I won't use. So you cast those aside. So just before I take this apart, I'll show you what this looks like already installed. Here we have the holder. And this is also part of the holder. The actual blade is right here, this tiny little piece of carbon. We'll take it all out and inspect it. Okay, now to take this portion apart, speedy screwdriver. I believe it's the exact same screwdriver I used about 5 years ago to do the original video. You take these 2 screws out. And I like this screwdriver because it's magnetic and it has a ratchet. Okay. The parts of the holder. So that is, part of the holder mechanism. This is also part of the holder mechanism. This is the new style aftermarket Makita replacement holder. Heavier gauge steel, just nicely made overall. It is not the blade. This is not the blade. What this does is replaces this. You see the difference. One is stamped steel, very thin. It functioned, I guess, originally. The secondary alternative is a much thicker, maybe a forged piece of steel, much heavier, about twice the weight. And hidden way down inside here is the actual blade. And my most controversial video continues. I have now laid out the parts for the actual planer blade replacement. The gauge block, this thin little wafer of a thing, is the actual blade. The aftermarket blade holding mechanism, heavy gauge steel. which also is included in that replacement kit, is this piece, which is part of the holder, and the two little screws. Those are the main parts of the blade. Okay, so how to assemble your new blade parts for your Makita planer. The very first thing that happens is the new blade goes in this holder here. This unit here has a very tiny little reveal on this back edge. And what happens is it lays in the blade. Using your thumbs, you push this whole thing forward into this block. Then, this other holding mechanism. And that's what the block is for. Once you've positioned this, everything theoretically stays in position, but it does move around, obviously, so you have to somewhat hold it with one hand and put the screws in with the other hand. So, magnetic screwdriver, what a friend, because you can't very well hold on to these tiny screws. So with one hand, I'm holding the holder and the mounting bracket right there in place. I take the screw, get my ratchet in forward gear, take the other screw, right, now these need to be tight as well as the blade needs to be centered. Tight is what we want. Okay, so that step is done. Okay, the tricky portion of the reassembly of the blade assembly in the Makita power plane. You take this little unit that you've just assembled. Now this is all part of the holding mechanism. This is not the blade, and there's a slot on the back right here that engages in this slot right here in the drum. And it's kind of a two-handed situation here. So that slides in first. Your blade has to slide in here. Okay, so hopefully you can see that, and you have to make sure it misses the body, the end of the blade. Now what holds this whole thing together is this piece of steel here, and you have to sort of push this little guy down on the side and slide this whole thing in right like this. Then once you have this mechanism all in here by hand, I take the 3 bolts, start them by hand, and start snugging this thing up as one unit. Before it's tight, you can spin it to make sure that your blades are going to miss the body, which they do. And the last task then is to check your tightness, and so I go one end, there's only 3 bolts, so the opposite end and then the middle. And that is the basis. So what you have here on the plane is then the blade is right here, and it's held in by that other piece of steel, and then this large black cover plate is the factory Makita part that holds the entire assembly onto the drum. So if I hold it sideways here, that thin little edge there is the blade, then you have the holder, and then you have this whole mechanism here that holds everything together. And that's basically it. So this concludes the workshop series of changing your Makita planer blades. We'll take it outside, do a test run, see how that goes, and obviously any questions or comments, go ahead.